Welcome to the Careers by Jen podcast, episode 278. This time on the podcast, Jen considers 7 steps to more effective communication. Step 1. Put your hand on the head of the person you want to communicate with and say, "My mind to your mind, my thoughts to your thoughts." Steps 2 to 7. Unnecessary.
You're listening to the Careers by Jen podcast. I'm your host, Jen Swanson. This is the podcast that helps you to get the job, love your work, and advance your career. Careers by Jen is a listener-sponsored podcast, and if you like the content, please consider supporting the show as a patron. You can do so for as little as $1 a month. Head over to CareersbyJenn.com and click on support to learn more. Hello, lovely listener. Welcome to the show where I help you to get the job, love your work, and advance your career. I am so glad you are here. Now, today I am offering you 7 steps to more effective communication. I taught communication to healthcare workers for more than 2 decades, and it's a subject near and dear to my heart. It's much of what my book is about, the book that I wrote called What They See, How to Stand Out and Shine in Your New Job. And that book is available on my website. I'll even sign a copy for you if you order it through my website. And I think it may still be up on Amazon. It was there for a long, long time. But that is what it's about. And communication is the whole reason I started this podcast in the first place. So I am very happy to bring you this little episode today. There is so much more to say about communication, and this is just some of it. And my friend, if you haven't had a chance to see it yet, I made a video last week. It took me a really long time to edit it. I think I was doing that most of Saturday. But I put out a video last week on how to look good on camera. If you are on a Zoom or a Skype call or a virtual interview, or even if you want to look good and be lit properly when you are socializing with people. So it's over on the YouTube channel, and in it I talk about communicating more effectively on screen through visuals and sound. So there may be some tips there that are useful for you too if you're interested in the topic of communication. You can find that linked in the podcast description of this episode, or you can find it under the resources section at CareersbyJenn.com, or you can just look up on YouTube, The Jen Swanson, and you'll find it there. All right, this podcast is recorded on the unceded and traditional territory of the Coast Salish people, including the Matsqui, the Kwantlen, the Katzie, the Semiahmoo, and the Stolo First Nations people. And I like to acknowledge that at the beginning of every show. Now, even though we are in the season of Advent and waiting is the name of the game, I will not make you wait any longer. 7 steps to more effective communication. Let's get right into them. The first one is listen more and talk less. The saying goes, we have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. And this is hard for those of us who love to talk, me included, but active listening, and I've got 4 other podcast episodes on this topic. Active listening and learning how to do that well will instantly improve your communication. Sometimes we don't take the time to really listen or to even acknowledge what somebody else is saying. Instead, we are so busy thinking about what we want to say that we barely hear the other person, let alone really listen and absorb it. So this is something you can do anytime, and no one needs to know that you're even doing it. Try it out, test it out on people, and try paying full attention to the speaker. Really listen to what they say and how they say it, and take time before you respond. People respond very differently to you when they feel heard and seen by you. And honestly, listening well to someone else is a gift. It's a big gift that you can give someone else because it's rare. Good listeners are not a dime a dozen, as they say. They just aren't. And so if you can become a good listener, you will be trusted more. And I'll get to trust in a moment. But you will learn a lot and you will make fewer mistakes in communication because you really will have heard the other person if you take time to listen. It doesn't mean that you have to agree with them, but sometimes just hearing someone else's point of view can make all the difference in a conflict situation or in disagreements, and it can reduce confusion. Sometimes there's not anything you can do about the situation and the other person is just venting. And so if you listen well, sometimes the situation de-escalates on its own, just because you took the time to really listen. If you want to learn more about active listening, I do. I have 4 podcasts on it. So episode 2, which is like 9 years ago when the show was called Communication Diva, but that is one of my most highly listened episodes. Episode 80, episode 122, and episode 214. All of these are about listening and listening more effectively. So lots of content. This is the 5th one about listening. My second step for you to effective communication out of the 7 is to be mindful of assumptions, yours and theirs. Now, one thing that I think is rude and assuming and sometimes even arrogant is when people assume you understand jargon or abbreviations and they don't check with you first about whether you do or not. Now, if you're in the same industry and the person isn't brand new, then likely they do understand the jargon or the abbreviations. But if you're talking to a customer or a client or a patient or a family member or somebody who isn't on the inside of whatever industry it is we're talking about, then there's no guarantee that they do know what you're talking about. And it's important to check with them before you start using that technical jargon or abbreviations that maybe they don't understand. Because what happens when somebody does that to you is it forces you to say, I don't know what that means. And I know that when that happens to me, I feel dumb, I feel out of the loop, or I feel like I should know and I'm neglectful of something. So I feel less than and not enough. Now, if you are not very assertive in a situation like this where somebody else is using technical jargon, you might find yourself just nodding and pretending that you know to save face. I've done that, and that's even worse because then the communication has been rendered completely ineffective because they just went blah, 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 and you didn't understand any of it, right? When I was teaching medical students who had to speak on a very frequent basis to family members, I used to always remind them to not use medical language, medical terminology, or jargon when they were speaking to family members or patients, but to change the terminology into plain English. Because, while we in the healthcare field know exactly what an ECG is, or a CBC, or an MRI, or an ERCP, the person listening to you may have no clue. And if you are a person in some kind of authority and the other person is not, it might be very hard for them to stop you and say, I'm sorry, I don't understand. Some people won't have a problem doing that, but other people, for whatever reason, might feel intimidated, might feel shy, and might find it very difficult to ask you what those things mean, and then you're actually not communicating. Almost every industry has jargon in it. There's an entire skit that we do in the church around welcoming people, where one of the characters speaks completely in church jargon and abbreviations to a visitor who has no idea what's going on, right? It doesn't matter what industry you're in or organization you're in. There are probably some abbreviations, some acronyms, some terminologies that people just don't understand who are not in that industry. Even coffee shops have their own jargon for, size of beverage that can be confusing if you're not used to it. So don't assume, and please make sure the person you are speaking to understands the terminology before you use it. You can just ask, and you can ask in a kind way. And I have often said to medical personnel when I myself or a family member was needing to be in the hospital or in a doctor's office, I've said, I understand the language, go ahead and use it. And it makes our communication far more efficient and faster because I do understand it. And so by me letting them know, I'm communicating effectively. So if you are somebody who understands the language and you're talking to somebody in the same industry who doesn't realize you're in that industry, you could say, yeah, you can go ahead and use the terminology. I know it. It just makes it easier, right? Also, under assumptions, don't assume you understand the other person's perspective or experience if you haven't asked about it or haven't heard it yet. When I experience, what I experience in a situation might not be at all what the other person is experiencing. So one way to break down assumptions is just ask the other person to describe their experience of what has been going on. And most of the time, if you do that, you will learn something that will then make your further communication with this person far more effective. If you don't take the extra step, you might both be working from different basic information in the first place. And that's how conflict begins. So be very careful about your assumptions and ask for what is going on in the other person's world around this subject before assuming that you know or understand. And that is a big, big tip. All right, the third step is to build trust. And you know what? If you do steps 1 and 2, if you listen well and you check your assumptions, you will automatically begin to build trust. Other ways that you can build trust are to keep confidentiality if what is shared with you is personal or private. Don't gossip about the conversation or share it with people that you don't have permission to share it with. Choose your time wisely when speaking with the other person if it's a sensitive topic, and choose your location. Ask for a time and place to have a conversation if you're going to give feedback or if you're asking for feedback. And I think if you are vulnerable and open yourself and show that you care, the other person will be more likely to trust you. And that will make conversation and communication far more effective. If you do what you say you will do it, when you say you will do it, and in the way that you say you will do it, and if you take care as to when and where you have the conversation with the other person, you are going to build trust. It's about relationship building. And so if you're listening to the other person, if you are not assuming, and if you are using empathy and respect, then you will build trust if you respect the other person. That's the third thing. The fourth thing is to speak clearly and concisely. So in other words, get to the point and keep it simple. Sometimes it takes a long time to get to the point, and this can be frustrating when time is of the essence or when the person is dancing around the topic and doesn't say exactly what they want to say clearly. And this can lead to misunderstanding, to confusion, to mistakes, to frustration. And it takes practice and courage if you're not a very assertive person to just come out and say that you disagree or that you don't want to do something that you don't want to do or you don't think it's a good idea. Speaking your mind and speaking your truth is not something that comes naturally to every single person. But it is something you can practice for sure. And my recommendation around that is to start small. Maybe you're somebody who has a really, really difficult time being decisive, making a decision. If that's the case, make a firm decision when you're ordering at a restaurant, right? Or say no to a solicitor on the phone, and see how that feels, right? Instead of dancing around and being pleasant and polite. I'm sorry, I'm not interested. Click, right? See how that feels. Don't be rude, but be firm and assertive. Say no when you really want to and feel that you can without jeopardizing anything. Get to the point and see what happens instead of using tentative language and hinting around, because that takes a really long time. And what if the person you're hinting at never gets the hint? This is a big part of communication is we assume the other person knows what you're talking about. We hint at things that people miss or don't pick up. And we don't speak clearly, but then we somehow expect the other person miraculously to read our minds. And guess what? We're not mind readers. Most people on the planet are not mind readers. So assuming or expecting someone else to be able to absolutely know what you mean or what you want or what you're talking about is a mistake on your part. And so you can try speaking as clearly and concisely as you can while giving all the details you need to and see what happens next. And again, you can experiment with people who will never know what it is that you're doing. It's a secret experiment. Okay, the fifth thing is to pay attention to your tone and your body language. Body language and paralanguage or tone, all of the things that are around the language, so inflection, speed, pitch, tone, these can all communicate far more effectively than even the words we speak. And this is why text and email can cause so many miscommunication incidents. This is actually the whole reason that emojis came to be, those little cute facial expression-y things that replace actual body language and facial expressions. And they were invented to enhance text communication. So when we are communicating by phone, we can't see the face or the body, but we can hear the tone of voice and the rate of speech and the pauses and the breath. When we are communicating by Zoom or Skype or FaceTime or any kind of video, we can have a hard time sometimes seeing faces or body language if there are lots of people on the call, and sometimes we'll miss things because we're not in the room able to gauge what's going on for somebody else by watching their body. And so effective communication is really a lot more challenging. But we actually communicate more non-verbally than we do with words. And that is something that we really, really need to understand. You can say something and mean something entirely different than the words that you say. When you are completely in alignment, you are being honest and open in your communication, and so that is something to watch for and to listen for in someone else. If they say yes, but it's hesitant, you might even pick up on that and ask about it. You know, I sense hesitation in your voice. Do you want to say more? That can really make things more clear and effective. You could just ignore what you are noticing, but then you wouldn't be getting the full communication, and that might come back to bite you. So tune in to body language and tune into tone and pacing and hesitations, and you will understand and learn a lot more about the other person you're communicating with for sure. The sixth thing is to ask clarifying questions. And I mentioned this, but in order to really understand what's going on, you might want to ask clarifying questions, and you might want to use paraphrasing, which just means to repeat back what the other person has said, but using your own words. So, for example, I'm hearing you say that you're too tired and you would rather not watch a show, but you'd like to get some extra sleep instead. Or what I'm hearing is that you would rather book this meeting next week because you've already spent too much time on screen this week and screen fatigue is real, right? Something like that. So you're repeating, but in your own words, what you've heard the other person say or what you think you've heard the other person say. And what that does is it gives them the option to say, no, that's not exactly what I meant, or yes, that's exactly what I meant. It clarifies the communication, and paraphrasing is a good tool to use. You don't want to do it all the time or it's going to get really annoying really fast. But when it counts, when you fully want to understand something that has been said or hinted at, or that you've noticed even from the body language or the tone, then you can use this extremely effective communication tool. And as far as clarifying questions go, what they do is they expand the topic and help to make things more clear in your mind. So an example is, so when you said you weren't sure about joining the choir, is it a question of energy and time management, or when the practices are scheduled for, or is it about the singing itself? So you see what I did there? I'm wanting to find out what exactly the hesitation is. It might be something entirely different. Maybe the person is shy and has stage fright and doesn't want to stand up and sing in front of people. But at least I will be more clear about what is preventing the person from joining in if I ask them, does this have to do with your time management, your schedule, when we've got the practices scheduled, or is it that you don't feel you can sing, or, what's the reason? So you're not going to know those answers if the person says, no thanks, I can't. You're not going to know for sure unless you ask. And they still might not tell you, but then at least you've done your part in trying to have an effective communication. All right, last thing, number 7. Recognize barriers or problems in communication. The 7th way to help you have a more effective communication is to recognize the barriers or the problems that there might be before you get into the conversation and adjust accordingly. So maybe the person has a heavy accent that you have to attune your ear to, or maybe you're the one who has a heavy accent and the other person has to adjust, in which case you might want more time and a quiet place to talk in so you can be a bit slower in your speech. Maybe there are technical challenges with what you have to communicate with. Maybe the person has cognitive challenges or memory challenges. I know that we sometimes have people in our lives who don't always remember, or who have good days and challenging days, depending on how they're feeling. So communication isn't always effective because of that. Hearing difficulty can pose communication problems, as can being in a noisy and distracting environment, which can also be an issue. Language. Are you speaking in a language that is not your first language, or are you speaking to someone else who's communicating in a second or third or fourth language and sometimes has trouble getting the right words? And if so, again, you might need to slow down and use something like Google Translate, or if they're really new to the language, get a translator. So what barriers or issues do you foresee coming up, and how can you make it less stressful for both of you and easier for the communication to happen? So planning when you are foreseeing some barriers can be a big help. All right, well, those are my 7 steps for you today. Effective communication takes time. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of effort and energy. And honestly, it is an ongoing, lifelong practice. And I've said this before, when people put excellent communication skills on their resume, that might be true, but it is an ongoing, it's not a once and done, check the box, I'm great kind of thing. Even people with degrees in communication will mess up and have to practice. So if you look at every conversation as an opportunity to work on this practice of communication, you will get better and better and better at it, and become quite effective, I'm sure. And maybe you already are, and this is just a good refresher for you. So there you go. Thank you for listening. And once again, I invite you to come over to the YouTube channel for more quick career tips. Until next time, stay well, be safe, and take good care of you. You've been listening to Careers by Jen with Jen Swanson. If you like what you heard, please share this. You know, if every single person listening today shared this episode with just one friend, our audience would be twice as big just like that. And the more people we can help with our content, the better. So help out a friend and help grow our audience by sharing this show with someone you know who would benefit from the content. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do that, and together we can make a difference. Until next time, take good care.